anyone has spent any length of time in Delhi, you will know just how important a topic this is. And I probably should do a poll from all of you of whatever it took you to get into this building this morning. That will also tell many people a story. I can only have a personal anecdote of how it took 1 hour, 35 minutes to get in here. 45 minutes of that was spent at a flyover, which is supposed to streamline transportation and help people get inside. But these flyovers sometimes can hold you up, as I said, 30, 35 minutes in one particular case. So the gentlemen on the panel are hopefully going to tell us how we're going to fix all of this and how getting to work can stop being an absolute ordeal and a nightmare, which it frankly is in just about every Indian city, to becoming something a little more pleasant. We have one of the most noted panelists, list of panelists out here on the field. I'm going to just run through them in order. Mr. Prakash Agarwal, Managing Director, Urban Mass Transit Company of India, who's has done a lot of work in consultation with this. Sitting next to him is Mr. Ganesan Vellupalai, who's the President of SCOMI International Malaysia. They've done a lot of work in monorails in particular, Bangalore not least. And I know some flyovers where we want you to put monorails underneath them if you possibly can, so as soon as possible. Mr. Ghosn needs very little introduction, Chairman, Chief Executive Officer of Renault, and also Chief Executive Officer of Nissan, member of the Foundation Board of the World Economic Forum. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us on this particular panel. Siddharth Lal, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Eicher Motors. Siddharth, it's great to have you with us, and maybe we'd be looking to get your perspectives. And Wolfgang Lamarca, who's Chief Executive Officer of Geopost Intercontinental in France, and we'd like to get some examples of how we can avoid this in other countries of the world as well. The format we intend to follow is if every speaker will maybe make just a couple of minutes of introductory comments, and then we can move on to a rather free-flowing discussion and then throw it open to some of the long-suffering residents of Delhi to get their perspectives on this issue. Mr. Agarwal, why don't I start with you, please?
Thanks, Vikram. Well, the way I see urban transport in India today, we have 4 major problems emerging out of this. One is the congestion that Vikram spoke about, and he was stuck in the traffic coming in here. The other, which most of us feel in Delhi, is the quality of the air. We've been having smog in the last few days, and it's something which is a big problem. The increasing number of accidents and the amount of imported fuel we consume. These are 4 major problems that we see on urban transport in the country. The way to get around this, we have a national urban transport policy which talks about focusing on public transport and non-motorized transport. Yes, that is the way to go. A little problem with the way we've been approaching this so far is the tendency is you set up facilities, you set up independent facilities. We've got an outstanding metro in Delhi today. We've got a bus rapid transit system which has started functioning. A few other cities are setting up metro rail systems. I think the weakness is in how these systems are planned. It's very important that they should all be planned in an integrated manner with not just the primary system, but also feeder systems, interchanges, land use being integrated around this, fare collection systems, parking facilities, non-motorized feeders. All of these need to be planned together. Most often that does not happen. And as a result, you end up seeing systems where a large amount of money is spent, but not an adequate number of people using them. I think that is going to be a key to planning transport systems within cities in India. A number of other things which are unique problems in the Indian situation. One is the dominance of the two-wheeler. The two-wheeler is something which is a very convenient vehicle. You can virtually park it next to your bed and next to your office table. It's very cheap to use, and on city roads is the most convenient vehicle to use. How do we get people from two-wheelers onto public transport is going to be a unique channel that India faces. The second fact is owning a vehicle is a demonstration of one's higher economic status in this society. How are we going to convince people that, fine, you may own one, but can you use it for family outings and once in a while when you go out? But when you go to work every day, can you use public transport? I mean, these are some of the challenges that we face in India. And that's how India is different from many other parts of the world.
Right. Thanks, Mr. Agarwal. Mr. Lemarque, some quick opening comments.
Of kilometers driven in a city is for the deliveries of goods. Another 10% is for the household purchases. Geopost, through his brand DPD, is delivering more than 500 million parcels a year, and we have a high interest to have an urban transportation environment which allows us to offer a good service to the local community. We are operating in India through a joint venture with Continental Carriers. In Delhi, the average kilometer per hour is 15, compared to, for example, Berlin, where it's 27. The numbers of vehicles in India are expected to grow between 2000 and 2030 by 500%. If I take constant parameters, I think the fastest mode of transport in the year 2030 could be walking. And I think that is not the model which everyone would like to see. In addition, urban transportation is determining quality of life. Every 5 minutes, somebody dies in India on the roads. We heard that new roads are built. Speed is a key factor, is a key driver of accidents. I believe if I'm from a foreign perspective coming to India, I see the great development in roads. I see maybe not enough crossovers, cross-unders. I see not enough shoulders. The flyovers are great, but we have no shoulders to park the cars when there is an accident. We might need drainage systems because monsoon puts a high strain on traffic. If you have low vehicles, the engines are flooded. If you're on a flyover, you have no shoulder, our trucks are stuck in traffic. There are two ways of approaching the problem in general. The first is to reduce the demand of transport. And I think you have in India already cities which build self-sufficient neighborhoods with access to shops, to markets, to schools, all within 10 minutes of walk. In addition, if we consider the 10% kilometers driven for household purchases, efficient home delivery systems can replace inefficient individual purchases. And you have very good examples here in India. For example, in Mumbai, there is a Harvard case. Then the second way is the reduction. And OP has mentioned we have to make public transport more attractive. How can we do it? First, expand on the success stories. Expand what works. And I personally have heard from a lot of people that the Delhi system, metro system works. So expand on it. I think then there might be reforms needed in existing systems. An example is the 1991 Santiago de Chile traffic reforms, where the government put standards for the bus system. Standards in quality. A bus should not be older than 10 years. Capping emission, putting bottoms and ceilings for fares. Then they tendered it out, and today private operator serve the city of Santiago de Chile in an efficient way. Then we can give monetary support, subsidies of tickets, tax cuts for companies who support public transport. Melbourne has given a free ride on trains, concluding before 7 a.m. to distribute the commuters. Delhi alone has 1 million people coming every day to work to the city. that adds 350,000 vehicles daily to the 5.5 million vehicles which exist already in Delhi. Park and ride systems might be a solution for this. You have 2 million vehicles transiting daily through Delhi. There are plans for the ring roads. That's needed. That's heavily needed to release the density of traffic. What can we do about it? When we look into the optimization, we look into 4 areas. The first area is operating system. To operate very efficient networks, that's our business. We have hub and spoke systems. We have trunk and feeder systems. We are very much working on optimizing the last mile, which is a very important element for the cities. Offering PUDO services, pickup and delivery services. That goes well along with the self-sufficient neighborhoods. Dialogue with the customer is important to avoid second delivery attempts. And that brings me to the second area, which is technology. And Carlos can speak much more about technology than I. Of course, it starts with IT. Capacity management is a big point to reduce traffic. But we are also talking about electric bicycles, electric two-wheelers, electric three-wheelers. We talk about electric vehicles. We talk about cooperation with entrepreneurs who build subsystems which we can use and which can optimize the traffic. I think, to summarize, the solutions are there, and India is capable to implement. I believe we should learn from what works, build a global master plan for India in certain city and roll it out.
Right. Mr. Lamakana, obviously urban mass transit systems are going to be really crucial in this. The Delhi Metro has been talked about as one of the success stories, but it's taken a long period for it to come up. Now, if other cities have to roll this out really fast, then some of the experiments that you, for example, Mr. Vellupillai, are doing in cities like Bangalore with the monorail may be important. Maybe if you could share some of those experiences with us and tell us whether some of those systems can roll out even faster.
I think a couple of basic issues that we all have agreed. This is the urban millennium. It's more than 50% of the people are living in the urban center, and the migration cannot be reversed. It just simply can't reverse. I think India has an idea of building 200 new cities to stop that urbanization. So we are stuck with 30-odd cities with more than 1 million people just in India alone. Now, that's a given. So you need to decongest the cities if you want to get to wherever you want on time. That's number one. Number two, public transportation is a subsidized business anywhere in the world. Very rarely, we must admit to this, the public must admit to this, it is not criminal that subsidies are there. It is to make sure that gaps are met. Now, this comes to a second issue I'll come to later. Third thing is multimodal planning. There is no single system, be it the metro, monorail, or the buses, or bus rapid system, that will cater for existing cities. Let's not talk about greenfield cities. Greenfield cities are well planned. We are talking about 30 top cities in the world today having all this problem. And let's talk about Mumbai. Mumbai has got 20-odd million people, inhabitants, more than that. And 11 million people come in a day in the train, suburban railway. 11 million people. Now you have to have last mile connectivity. Now, this is where the issue comes out, the intermodal, flexible systems. This is where part of the urban transportation fails to do it. And then we have experienced it. It's not just in India. I mean, in Kuala Lumpur, we have also had the same problem, the last mile connectivity, the multimodal, seamless travel that people want to have. That brings down your costs of operating the city, cost of running a city, cost of doing business. So we need to understand that. So Mumbai has a 30-year master plan, and they looked at the situation, and as they visited world over, and they looked at monorail as a solution to transverse into this difficult condition. It reduces land acquisition, a major issue in this country. The Mumbai monorail project, which we are doing at 20-kilometer 18-station system, is to be delivered in 30 months. Why? Because the land acquisition is less than 1%. We take that away. Number two, it's easy to install. Number three, you do not transfer into people's property. You are friendly because it's silent. So the metros are going to do the great job of bringing the people in, but connecting the city in a complete cycle will be what we are intending to do. Now, this is evident all over the world. Today, there's a Brazilian, Brazil floated a tender yesterday, $1.5 billion for a monorail that a metro system couldn't do, and they had to, because of land acquisition, and therefore they've converted it to monorail to transport 500,000 people a day. Now, all over the world, this is happening. The last mile connectivity on existing cities with least path of least resistance. And therefore, the reality today is there are many more systems available. What you want to do as well is do not take the right of way of existing traffic users. So people must understand, you either go underground, and if it's a cost that you must pay to go underground, pay the cost. You have to understand that you are paying to catch up. And do not build to catch up. Build for the future. Build for the capacity that you need to cater over the next 20 years. What happens in a lot of cities is they build to cater for the existing needs. And by the time they complete the project, the needs are already gone. Okay. Then comes to the major issue of funding. 2 years ago, when we were in this forum, under infrastructure, we identified that there is a lot of money, and there is a need for the money to be used in urban infrastructure or infrastructure. But the intermediaries for the money to reach the market is missing. You look at a PPP model that we are talking about, what is the clear policy of gap funding? There are 7 things that you need to do before you qualify for gap funding. Make that clear. India needs to make that clear. And over the last 2 days, I mean, I looked at the Minister of Roads. He has come up with very clear-cut. 8 months, the land acquisition will be done. They have very clear-cut policy, and I believe that it will just spearhead a major movement in building roads in this country. The same thing needs to happen in urban transportation. Somehow, this is not happening. It has to happen. If not, you will not unleash the capital that is needed. We're talking about long-term debts. We're talking about new look at concessions. We must understand we need to decongest the cities. If not, you are just going to be flooded with people. And everybody will be on a standstill. Thank you.
All right, Siddharth, if I can just toss to you, one on any overall comments you might have, and also just perhaps if you could lead off from the point of last mile connectivity, which is crucial, because the metros will take people to a metro station. You will not have everyone get all the cars off the road unless from those metro stations people can easily get to their houses.
Feeds back into what Mr. Agarwal was saying, which is multimodal or mixed mode transportation. And it is absolutely crucial that we take a larger view on all the different transportation modes that are available for us. So as the policies and as the missions say that we have to talk about public transport and non-motorized transportation. So we're talking about metros, we're talking about city trains, we're talking about buses, we're talking about mini buses for connectivity, we're talking about taxis, we're talking about auto rickshaws, we're talking about share autos, which are there in smaller cities, about share taxis, about cycle rickshaws, about cycles, cycling zones, pedestrian zones, and motorcycles, scooters, and cars. So it's not just about cars. That's the point. It has to be multimodal. It has to be mixed modal. I think the gentlemen have all put together, a great idea and vision. But I want to challenge that further. I want to push that much further. I want to say that we could still be going down the wrong path in India. We could still be going down inadvertently because what we see for the last 100 years in the developed markets is a lot of cars, and the cars are still the nucleus of public transportation in most parts of the world, in the developed world. So I want to push ourselves further to say that we need to really rethink. We cannot afford to make the mistake of going down that route and then in 2030 or 2040 saying, okay, now we need to turn turn the clock. We can't turn the clock then. It's not possible. So we have to find ways of pushing that forward. What the first billion did in the 20th century cannot be done by the next 5 or 6 billion in the 21st century. It's not sustainable. We don't have the space, we don't have the ability to pollute so much in the environment, and we don't have that much fuel available, as was said. And there are safety concerns also, which was discussed. So we will have to make trade-offs. If you want to have much more public transportation and mixed mode transportation, there will be trade-offs. A lot of cities are looking at that already. The trade-offs may mean that some of us here, some of the people here, I mean, it may mean slightly less convenient in terms of the great convenience we have today of going in a car. It may be less convenient. It may be that you'll have to pay more. It may mean that we'll have to, we'll be restricted in certain roads or in certain hours of the day. But we will have to take those trade-offs of making it less convenient for some people right at the top to make it much more convenient for the rest of the city. And that's really where we need to go. Just to give you illustrative perspective, I mean, what is the footprint required to carry 100 people, for example? Is one bus. A bus is 12 meters by 2.5 meters in a static mode, and I'm talking static right now, which is around 30 square meters. The same 100 people to go in cars will take around 500 square meters. So we're talking about an order of magnitude difference. So the point here is that we have the infrastructure, we have the roads. We need to build on that, of course, as was discussed, but given the infrastructure, given the space availability, we can still do 10x, we can still transport 10 times the number of people efficiently. And that's the way we need to push ourselves. That's how all of us need to do that. And I think the important thing here is public policy and about perspective and about positioning. Because when some of us look at BRTS in Delhi, if you see how the press has maybe portrayed it a little bit and how some of the people who are in cars portray it is not very good. I mean, we talk about it being extremely slow and extremely difficult for people. I'm certainly not saying it's perfect. It does require improvements. And this was an experimental corridor of maybe 12 kilometers which was taken up. But the fact is that for the maybe few thousand people that have slowed down in traffic because of the BRTS, the ones going in cars, the silent majority of tens of thousands of people every day who go down that road, they're extremely happy. When you talk to them, their commute has come down by a third, a roundabout, in that going in the BRTS. So the silent majority is really happy. The cyclists are thrilled. They don't have this big bus, just beaming down them and behind. They have a separate lane. So that's the way we need to go. We do need to make trade-offs. So if it is a bit slower for cars, so be it. As long as the tens of thousands and the larger majority can go more efficiently, more cheaper than they're going today, and with better safety, with better environment, you're not exposed to the rain, you're not exposed to the sun as you are in other ways. So this is really the way to go. As was discussed, how do we move two-wheelers to public transport? Well, firstly, it has to be really good. So we do have to build that really good infrastructure in public transport, not just the trains, not just the buses, but even the last mile, the feeders. And the entrepreneurial part has to come in, as was discussed. So once you give the broad guidelines, I mean, as to how it's going to be done, and certainly not the way Delhi had gone earlier in terms of the blue line buses and all of that. I mean, that's really death on roads. So that's really not the way to go. But to regulate it much better, yet let entrepreneurs have share taxis, have other ways of going about it. And that's really going to allow us to get into the 21st century, allow us to have a sustainable transportation situation in urban India in the 21st century.
All right, Siddharth. Ms. Ghosn, some thoughts from you to kick off?
No, I'm going to be very short. Just to say, there is no question that multi-modular or multi-system is necessary, even for a car maker. We know very well that, for example, in the case of India, you cannot have mass transportation assured only by cars. I'm going to, very simple statistics, 50 cars per 1,000 inhabitants in India. You have 600 to 800 cars per 1,000 inhabitants between Europe in average, Japan and the United States. Even if India approached 600 cars per 1,000 inhabitants, we're talking about multiplying by 10 or 12 the number of cars, and we know exactly, no matter how effective building the transportation, the infrastructure for transportation is going to be, it's not possible. So we know very well that other systems are going to have to be developed. Now, other systems have to be planned. The problem of metro is you decide a metro, people are going to start to benefit from it probably 10 years down the road. And this is in the best case. So you have to plan long time in advance, and often when the plan comes to reality, it's already short or different from what people need. So you need also a flexible system to correct what the plans cannot forecast. And the car industry is here to be the flexible system allowing this to happen. Now, the problem of the car industry, and the car industry will play its role, and hopefully it's not going to be a dominant role, because we know very well that a dominant role will not be to the benefit of the consumer. It's going to have to be complementary. Now, we know very well that the car by itself doesn't have a great image, but the technology today allows this image to be corrected. The first one is CO2 and emissions. I mean, people who already are struggling with the CO2 emission in India today, imagine if you tell them the number of cars being driven are going to be multiplied by 10 or 12, they're going to see this as impossible. They cannot accept this. So we're going to have to come with cars which, in terms of fuel efficiency and in terms of emission, are much better, much, much better than what is offered today. That's why I think that the zero-emission cars are part of the solution. Electric cars today, fuel cell cars in the future. It's not electric cars. It's affordable electric cars. It's affordable hydrogen-driven car. And that's the main challenge, because we have the technology to make electric cars, we have the technology to make fuel cell cars, but there is still a lot of work to make them affordable. So when the public goes and buys this car, he has the impression also he's making a rational economic decision. On top of this, there is another system I want to attract the attention to, and this will be my final comment. That's not only about emission, but that's also about traffic. You know, in many cities, you go downtown and it's terrible because the car is not useful anymore because you're stuck into a traffic jam. You know, I understand that today you were facing a traffic jam that you were not foreseeing, okay? So this is getting worse. So we have systems allowing cars to communicate between themselves. In fact, we, as Nissan, we tested it in Beijing for the Olympics, and it's working very well. Where you have a system which is not very expensive, allowing cars to communicate with each other and allowing you to take automatically the best routes, not following a central system which is going to be very heavy, but just like the internet, you know, communication, cars by themselves, and you have an optimization of the route. So these systems where from one side you're limiting emission, from the other side you're allowing cars to optimize the drive, are going to be very helpful for the car to play its role as a complementary role to other mass transportation in what people need.
Right. If I could just ask you one question, there's obviously been a lot of debate about small cars, the Tata Nano, which has been launched out here. I know you're planning to come out with a small car. There's some people who say that the move to small, cheap cars will make the problem much worse because so many more people will be able to drive around in cars. And the others who say that's an elitist view. Why can't people, you know, buy a small car? I mean, you're just making it a more democratic thing, the chance of owning a car. How do you see this debate?
You know, the problem is that usually the people who consider that, you know, it's a bad thing for everybody to have a car are people who already have a car. Okay? So if you have already a car, I say, well, you know what, to save the planet, maybe the neighbor should not have a car. But that's not a very reasonable position, because we know very well that in developing countries, in emerging market, the first thing people want to buy is a car, because it changes your life. You know, you have autonomous transportation, and people talk about small cars. No, when you buy your first car, you don't want it to be small. You know, small car is something for rich people. It's not for people who are emerging. If I want to buy my first car, I want the biggest, largest possible, because I want to transport my family, I want to transport my friends, I want to put a lot of things in it. So the future is for a large car as cheap as possible. Okay? That's the concept. Now, whenever you buy the first car and the second car, now in the third car, you can accept a compact car, you know, for other transportation. I think trying to say this aspiration is not the right aspiration is wrong. What we need to do is to say, no, people are going to buy cars anyway. What we need to do is make cars absolutely more environmentally friendly, and the technology is here, and we're going to do it. Mass marketing, affordable electric cars, we're going to do it. And second, allow cars to communicate, in order to solve the traffic problem, particularly in urban transportation.
Quickly say something to that.
There is I don't think it's a debate about the small car. I think that's quite a silly debate, actually, because, I mean, if you can buy big cars, you should be able to buy small ones. But the issue really is that we don't want to see every car owner, whether it's me or whether it's the guy with the small car or anybody, using their car daily for their daily commute. It should be there for their freedom. It should be there for an evening out, for taking the family. But for the daily commute, when there's a single person, that is not the right mode, in my opinion.
Yeah. Siraj, actually the debate is not so much about small car versus big car. It's about the fact that suddenly you have really cheap cars available. So as a result of that, you're suddenly having the car-owning population potentially doubling, tripling, quadrupling, and then what happens to urban transportation? I think that was what people were saying, and Mr. Goel is completely right that the debate was led by people who already have a car, and they weren't saying, okay, we're going to throw our car aside and walk from now onwards.
Then you have restrictions. You don't allow cars in the city or in certain parts. You have congestion charges. You have other ways of controlling cars from coming in, as long as you give the public transport infrastructure. You can't restrict cars and not give public transportation.
Okay, I just want to ask about, and I really want to use Delhi as a bit of an example for this, because 10 years ago, people said that Delhi was like a giant parking lot. It was really awful. And then all of these roads were built. All of these flyovers were built. And suddenly everyone said, this is fantastic. Delhi is going to have such beautifully streamlined traffic from this point onwards. And today, if you are to drive into Delhi, you actually do find the roads, the flyovers, far better than there are in just about any other Indian city, especially if you compare it to a city like Mumbai. And yet, traffic in Delhi seems to be getting worse. And yet, I mean, I hate to keep on dragging everyone back to my morning commute, but half an hour was spent on a flyover because people couldn't turn right and there was just a jam out there. It's about a kilometer-long jam. So is there something going wrong here? That though you're building these roads, you're building the flyovers, for some reason we're not solving the traffic problem. Maybe if you could come in on that.
Well, widening roads or building flyovers, effectively increasing road capacity, has not solved the problem anywhere in the world. It's a kind of a short-term solution. So if you have an intersection which is very crowded, you tend to build a flyover in the belief that it'll reduce congestion. But what it tends to do is bring in more demand onto that road. You have a lot of latent demand which doesn't come onto the road because people say, oh, it's so crowded, let me not make this trip. But once you've built it and it becomes a much smoother ride, you have a lot more traffic coming on. So what has been seen world over is, every time you do this, you end up with the same kind of congestion as you had before the flyover, but at a higher volume of traffic.
I think case in point is Los Angeles, where they built 16 lane highways. And they thought that would control the problem. But actually what happens is more people get cars, people move further away out of the city so that, so that they can get a cheaper housing, and it stays exactly the same. So that's not going to solve the problem.
Marco, you agree with that? Building roads, building flyovers is not the solution?
I think we need infrastructure. We need the right infrastructure. And I mentioned build the right infrastructure. I gave some examples. And I think that the congestion charge, for example, is a very good methodology to also work on how a city operates. In London, when they introduced it, they generated not only 160 million pounds revenue, which was invested in the bus system. They also increased the speed of traffic by 37% by reducing the commuters by 20. And I think there were a lot of examples given that is the way to go.
Must be a politically sound issue, because if you're going to put entry tax here, I think the government will lose the elections. Let's be realistic about it in current situation. What is happening is you build the infrastructure, you build in the highways, and suddenly there's a population growth. Didn't take into account the huge growth in cars, did not provide for enough parking. Now again, parking is a key issue. You can build all the infrastructure you want, you can build all the mass rapid transport system, but if you do not allocate land, mandatory allocation of land for parking and ride, it will work. It will just not work. Everywhere in the world that you go, parking is very important. You don't blame the car guys. I mean, they have a right to own the car. They want to have the privilege of owning the car. So now, what do? You make it easier. You have parking lots, and then they can go straight into the commuter system and come into in the city. Now, if you fail to do that, no system is going to work. And that's why you have a cardiac arrest, like you had this morning. You got to have build bypasses. You got to bring in the cardiac surgeons and decongest the cities. Decongesting the cities is one thing. Building additional infrastructure is completely another thing. Decongesting the city is about planning and seeing how they can be. Taking buses off the road is not necessarily the bad thing. If you have more buses on the road, but they are just standing still, that's not the answer. The answer is to make the traffic flow smoother. And public transportation has, especially mass transportation, has a role to play. It has got to be mandated.
Mr. Ghosn, there's the question of congestion charges and, penalizing people for getting cars into the city is fine in a city like London, where you do have a viable public transportation system. You can use the metro. Now, in a city like Delhi or Mumbai, for that matter, yes, there's that central train running down, but you don't have last-mile connectivity. People can't get to a lot of the places where they want to use the public transportation. So do you have to first build the mass transit system and then try and push people away from cars and onto that? Is that the way you think it has to be?
I'm personally not very favorable to coercive measure, where we say, the public is making the wrong choice, so we're going to take away cars or tax. I mean, I'm not favorable. In many countries, often when you offer an alternative, people find with a lot of common sense that the alternative is good, they judge it, and they move into this direction. You have many countries, for example, and I'm not going to nominate them, but you can, we're saying, well, you don't have enough infrastructure, so what do? We put the surtax on cars, okay? So you put 20%, 30%, 50% on tax. At the end of the day, you make the car very selective, and people are left without transportation because you don't build any alternative. I think what we need to do is encourage more alternative building, and people will reasonably make the choice. I can give you another example, is Japan, Japan, you have a lot of alternatives. You can take the train, you can take the metro, you can take the bus, you can take your cars. So the public moves, you can have your car, but at the same time, when you go to work, many people in Japan at very high level go work with the metro, because it makes a lot of sense. And they use their car for, so every time you have alternative, we're building alternative, and let the people choose. They have enough common sense in order to make the decision. Now, government can decide fiscally in function of the interest of the nation. Okay? If they want to limit oil import, they can favor another electricity, and everybody understands it. But I am not favorable to coercive measures that usually hide the fact that governments are not doing a job into offering alternative. Because at the end of the day, transportation is an important element for economic growth. It's an important element for people to develop themselves, and they're going to need it. And one thing I want to add also about, we're looking at the car as one particular alternative between many things. What you need to know, and this is valid for car, for motorcycle, or even for three-wheelers, is the car is not an object. We look at it as an object. It's not. It's not. In many countries, it's something which looks like a pet, not an object. You know the car, everybody decides to it, you decorate the car, you put your picture, the family picture. I was very interested in New Delhi. I was going downtown, and I look at the three-wheelers, people driving the three-wheelers, they have image, they have the picture of the kids, they have, it's a pet, it's a familiar environment. Nobody put a picture in the metro. You don't. You don't. The car, you own it. It's part of your space. It's an expression of yourself. And this is something not to be neglected.
All right, fine. Well, okay, let's see if we can find some alternatives other than the family pet to get people around.
The metro space for people to
yeah, so let's just look at now the scale of the problem which you face in India. It's also, India is not one of the countries where there's one big city which you've got to fix. And once you fix that, you solve a lot of your urban nightmares. You've got to probably fix urban transportation in, 30 cities, 40 cities, maybe 50 cities in the next 20 to 30 years. In each of those cities, the problem is as vast and as huge as it is in a city like Tokyo or New York or London. So I guess the big question I want to ask all of you is, how are we going to do this? Where are the funds going to come from? What is the process that should be followed? So let's sort of get down to what we think the government should be doing. Why don't I start with you?
Well, let me put it this way. You've given a number of 30, 35, 40. It looks sort of very difficult. But one of the things that we didn't do right in India was when we planned our cities, we didn't plan our transport systems up front. I think it's very important for any city in its planning process that transport must form the backbone around which a city must grow. It happened accidentally in Bombay because you had these railway lines and you had the sea on either side, so the Bombay grew as a linear city. Delhi, unfortunately, that didn't happen. Delhi went all around, and now you have a transport system trying to catch up with wherever Delhi is going. That's not the way it should happen. We have 7 cities with a population of more than 7 million, more than 4 million. But you have a large number of cities which come in what I'm calling the mid-sized city, roughly 1 million to 4 million. I think those are cities that are good targets for us to start looking at solutions right now. It's going to be much easier to deal with, and probably if we take 2 or 3, we'll be able to create replicable models for other cities to adopt. If you start looking at 4 million plus cities, I think we'll have to find unique solutions for each one of them. But with the mid-sized cities, which are soon going to become 4 million plus, we need to start looking at them far more seriously than we're doing right now.
And what do you do in the big cities? What do you do in a city like Mumbai, where it's always a challenge to figure out where the space is to be able to put mass transit systems? And I know the monorail is coming up, and we'll be here more
So
about
with the large cities, you certainly have to look at multimodal public transport systems which are well integrated. No, you have to plan a person's trip from his origin to his destination. That's something which makes urban transport far more complex than intercity transport. And that's why how he would travel from his home to the bus stop, and from the bus stop to the metro station and to the monorail station or whatever it is, you need to think of the entire journey as an integrated trip. That's very important as far as these cities. That's why you need multimodal systems which are well integrated. If you go to mid-sized cities, that kind of a complexity will be far less than planning for Bombay or Delhi. And in those cities, problems of land acquisition may not be as severe as they are here. You'll have these cities growing in many directions. They're still growing a lot, so you can take care of transport before that kind of growth has happened. And that's why I think it's very, very important to look at those cities far more seriously. We're already working on the large cities, but I think the kind of work that also needs to be done simultaneously on the mid-sized cities needs to happen very quickly.
So, plan from now. And in a country like Hong Kong, for example, in Hong Kong, every time they are practically sanctioning a new housing project, they first see how are we going to get the MRTS into this particular housing colony. So right from people's origins to the place of work, there is mass transit system. Is that the sort of a thing that we need to do here, or no?
Yeah, not just the transportation, even simple things like water, sewage, and all that. It's a city planning issue. And I think integral is the transport planning, number one, of course, the commuting. The second thing, I think we have to look at it from 3, the short term, and the medium term, and the long term. The long term will be your highways and your bypasses and your dedicated corridors to move freight out of the city so that the freight doesn't come into the city. The people that you are crossing the city don't come to the city, but they have bypasses. The 3 things that you need to look at: time to market. How fast can you get to the market? Because people are just coming in. They're just migrating into the cities. And you need to curb that. You need to provide them. Second is convenience. Convenience is about a person, every 500 meters, there is an alternative transport. I can go to a station here or a metro station there, and I walk down, there's a monorail station or a bus station. Convenience. And price point. There's always a limitation to what you can. And price points are determined by, in India and a lot of developing countries, are determined by availability of capital, availability of funding. Fundamentally, this is a flaw or a shortcoming that has to be addressed in India. The PPP model has got to be refined. The concession model has to be refined. You need to attract long-term capital. And this is something we talked about. If you're talking about greening and a green environment, you need to be able to commit the capital. And that is part and parcel of all these things. And this is a This is something that's already happening, and I see that's happening very clearly on the highways and roads. And this must now come into the urban transportation. This is one thing that has been spoken about in the last 3 sessions that we've had. It's something that must be addressed to the long-term capital, you know.
But you think the funding will eventually, I mean, would India be able to find the funding to fix urban transportation in all the cities?
Let me put it this way, they're all at the gate, they're waiting. The money will come. But let's just get the modality clear, concise, and precise. And the money will come. This is a great nation with lots of growth, and the people are waiting, but it's not clear. You just need to make that road clear.
Ghosn, any other thoughts that you would have if you were transport czar of the country for some reason and you had to fix urban transportation? How would you do it? Mr. Ghosn, I'm going to toss to you first.
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I thought you were asking my...
No, I'm going to ask you first.
If I was the transport czar of the country, no, I think all the solutions are here. I mean, what we heard about, planning for metro, making sure that you have adequate parking spaces, making sure that in a certain way people have alternatives, that it's not only one way to go. I will make sure that there is a balance between what the car industry can do, what the bike industry can do, what the bus industry can do, and what the more mass transportation like the metro can do. I will ensure that there is a balance, that there is a plan, that from one side we have a plan that's going to cover the needs of the country for the next 10 or 15 years, and from the other side, because they're going to be mistaken, a plan cannot be seen as, this is the right thing to do. You're never sure. But that you have enough flexible solution around it to correct what's not going to be handled. But it looks like, and frankly, the money, I mean, with the growth that you are foreseeing for a country like India, I agree with you that money is always an issue, but it's not a big issue because growth is going to generate the money necessary, and everybody has interest, even direct interest, into infrastructure to be developed. Everybody. Nobody can neglect this because even the car makers, consider that not only road, but even ports and metro and everything else is needed for the car industry to be able to develop normally.
All right. Siddharth, you step out of this session and the Prime Minister is waiting for you outside and says, you're the new urban transport minister. What are the first 3 things you do?
Well, first I'd thank him because...
Okay, after you thank him. Next. And after you've fended off what the present urban transport minister is going to say to you, what's the third thing you do?
Well, really it is about setting the priorities and making the trade-offs. So, and it is all about what has been discussed now, I think, quite a bit, which is mixed mode transport. And it is, like you said, we have to take all stakeholders into the game. It's not one stakeholder against the other. It is multimodal, it is long-term, it is for the people, it is for the masses. And that's what governments want as well. I mean, it is really for the last person, and it is, so all these things have to be fixed. I mean, just to give you a small example about what we take for granted in Delhi, for example, which is not the case in other parts of the world, or in India, we take for granted. Parking charges. We go in the city center and we expect for 10 rupees to park, 4 hours. I mean, that's not real pricing. I mean, if you were to actually rent a space of 10 square meters, which is required, it would cost you maybe 100 rupees or 500 rupees. So we are still subsidizing the current way of transportation. So we have to move entirely away from that. We have to make it real pricing. We have to make sure that it is done from a 2050 perspective and then looking backwards. We can't afford to make the mistakes. We have to put in the money. The capital is available. So you can make money from the current way of taxation. It's already there. But this is revenue generating. You're not subsidizing. You can actually make money on transportation. So it's all available. That's my belief.
Marcus, any specific recommendations that you would have?
I agree. We make money on transportation. For a foreigner, it's difficult to say what the Indian government should do. For me, it's always a difficulty to whom I should go, who should do, who takes the leadership, and who has the vision how Delhi should look like, for example, on the short term and on the long term. As I said, we're looking at several factors. How should the city operate? What is the technology we should favor? What infrastructure is needed? And infrastructure is large. If there is no electricity, the metro doesn't work. That happened on Sunday. Yeah. And what policies are needed. And we need, I think there is a vested interest of all stakeholders to improve the situation. So we are aligned in our wish to do something about it. I think we need also a favorable framework which gives us the autonomy and supports us. That will attract all the talent, the entrepreneurial talent of India to do the necessary.
All right, tap the entrepreneurial talent. Why don't I now take some questions from the audience and see what they make of it. Mr. Bajaj. I think that's on, yes.
I have two questions, mainly directed to Mr. Agarwal. Everyone talked about multimodal transport, but it was basically road-linked or rail-linked. What about the sea? Delhi doesn't have that advantage, but Bombay does. We have a sea link which has not been tapped to reduce the congestion, traffic congestion. Though we have got that bridge, but still, that takes away 15 minutes from your 2 hours of reaching the suburbs from South Bombay. But why are you not making use of this sea? That's one. Secondly, you talked about a very interesting concept of this is the right time to talk about the medium cities before they become mega metropolis. What did you have in mind? What kind of models? Now, Helsinki, for example, they stop the traffic before it enters the city square, and there are trams or you walk. You know, that's where all the shopping, etc., they were there when I went there. What kind of models do you have in mind when you're talking about let's plan now before they become big cities?
Mr. Agarwal?
I entirely agree with you on using water transport, whether it's the sea or the river. I didn't give that as an example because it's not too many cities where you have that opportunity. Guwahati, for example, is one city where I've lived in for many years, and inland water transport is one of the means by which people travel from one bank to the other. Similarly, in Calcutta, you have a fair bit of inland water transport. What has happened with them is they're not, they're considered outdated technologies. With the result, the kind of investment and effort that we need to be making in improving or speeding up this, that has not happened. And I entirely agree with you that there is a case for looking at them far more closely. Bombay, certainly the sea is a very good opportunity to use. I entirely agree with you. What I mean by medium-sized cities and what is the way forward is, as I said, one of our weaknesses in urban planning has been we've not thought of transport as a part of the planning process. It's come much later. Let's not make that mistake with the medium-sized cities. If you're looking at new areas, in most cities, when you develop a master plan, you do know where the city is going to grow. Can we think of transport systems as part of that planning process so that if any mass transport is to be planned, let's not look at what ridership it will bring in now. Let's look at what ridership it will bring in the future. That's how the two need to be integrated in the planning process. And if we don't do that with the medium-sized cities, we'll have these cities also growing to what our larger cities have become. Right. There's no specific...
Right, sir. The gentleman there? Any final thoughts you wanted to say, Mr. Agarwal?
My name is Harish from Grant Thornton. I think the whole discussion has been on the assumption of a continuous linear demand of, for transportation. Would technology, which will enable more people to work from homes, change some of the equation, and are we planning for huge demand and then figure out that it's not required in the end?
Okay, that's a great question. Do you think that possibly happening, both in terms of, and this links partly to what you were saying, that getting more things to people in their homes so they don't have to go out. So work from home, don't go out at all?
I think that would definitely happen. There is today a different way of working. There are very efficient collaborative models which are based on modern technology where engineers work from all over the world, why not all over the city or all over India, to design cars, for example. Definitely, that is something which helps. And I think we touched on the point with the self-sufficient neighborhoods. And I think in India that started already.
Mr. Ghosn, you don't look convinced right now.
You know, we had many experiences where, you know, we tried to ask people to work from home into different jobs. You know, car manufacturers have many different jobs, and we had this experience in Japan, we had it in the United States, we did it in Europe, in many countries. I mean, at the end of the day, it's very marginal because people want to meet, they want to exchange, they want to go into places which are not the familiar place where they live. So part of the work can be done at home, but still we see a lot of resistance. Even the people react very positively at the beginning, but very quickly they come back to, you know, we need to work with our colleagues, we need to meet our boss, we need to meet our team, and little by little more and more regularly. So there is something which can be expected from this, but frankly, I don't believe it's going to be a massive solution for the future.
Well, for example, business travel, you know, with video conferencing now coming, and you've got things like telepresence where you almost feel as if you're in the same room. There are people who feel that items of that are going to cut down some of the traveling at any rate. You do feel as if you're almost in the same room.
No problem. That means I understand that, but in fact, it's eating away some of the growth which is planned, but it's not eliminating the growth. Still, you know, you can look at the statistics for the last years. The demand for travel continued to increase, maybe not at the pace that it would have increased without these tools, but I don't think these tools are going to turn the trend down. I think they're going to limit the growth.
I don't think we need to worry about that. Absolutely not. Because, I mean, the fact that people are moving to cities means that they want to be together. Otherwise, there should be a reverse migration out. So it can, as Mr. Ghosn said, slightly, I mean, a few percent points it can reduce. But it's really not the problem because we have so much demand on the requirement, even from a 2050, you know, 2100 horizon, I don't think it's going to be a problem at all. I mean,
all right, the gentleman there, towards the back.
From Oliver Wyman. When I see the traffic and we talk about discussions like these, we talk a lot about transportation planning. One of the thoughts I've always had is, can we sort of flip the problem around a little? Do we start talking a little more about urban planning? And I'll take an example over here. Let's look at Gurgaon. It's a new city. We don't have a business center. As a result, traffic just goes absolutely haywire. So is there a focus on urban planning that can slowly resolve the problem or make it slightly more efficient?
Anybody want to take that? I mean, that's part of what we've been talking about.
My earlier comment is that, you know, new cities should not have this problem. I agree with you, urban planning should have taken care of this. It should never have happened on a greenfield. The problem today that everybody is facing all across the world is existing cities that are growing. I mean, take the top 30 metropolis in the world. You are inheriting that situation. So in a new city, I agree with you, urban planning should have taken care of that. And as he has said, it should be integrally built around the transportation plan. You know.
I think it is also partially valid for existing cities. I think that Singapore was successful in optimizing their traffic situation through urban planning. I believe it's something to look into.
Right, the gentleman here.
Yeah, my name is Ramesh Kailasam. I just wanted to bring the other side of the issue, which we have not thought about, is that all of us put pressure on the infrastructure. I mean, each of us pour into the roads at the same time. And for example, let's take a case where there is a cyber city which has 100,000 people working. You will have almost 100,000 people, say 50,000 vehicles driving into that poor little road which cannot expand by itself. So the businesses should also be responsible enough to stagger the timings to make up to the road which is available, because we know that the road will not expand. And the second thing is on, let's take the case of Singapore. When they built the places for pedestrians to pass, they looked at the behavioral aspect of where are the pedestrians collating together to cross the road. For example, when Gurgaon Expressway was built, people didn't think of an overhead bridge. So people just used to run across whenever the cars used to pass. So simple things like that, which are common sense issues, can always create a lot of impact on the road. and that can bring down the congestion. The last important point was on the congestion part. We don't quantify things, so we don't understand the impact of the problem. We just say we spent an hour and 45 minutes on commuting, but how much fuel we burnt unnecessarily is not looked at. For example, in agriculture, there is an example. When somebody asks you, how much water did it take for 1 glass of rice to reach your plate, people say 2 glasses, when actually it was 5,000 liters, which went into cultivating it. So in the case of traffic, when you say you took 1 hour 45 minutes to reach a particular place, the amount of fuel that got burned that day and the subsidies which the government is also burning through that is something that needs to be quantified and looked at. So these are simple issues.
Right, and if I could just also take that a little forward, and the example of people running across, user behavior is also something that I think is very crucial, especially in India. And one of the things that contributes a lot to the problems of traffic in a city like Delhi is, if I can find a polite word for it, the indiscipline of the users, where you will find, if there's a slight blockage, it could have been eased if it wasn't for the fact that 40 people will go in 40 different directions and completely clog the roads, and it won't get unclogged for a couple of hours. How do you fix that? Siddharth?
Discipline happens only through enforcement. I mean, people are not going to be disciplined.
Catch people, drag them out of their cars and whip them, or something like that.
Something of that nature. Or
something of that nature.
Well,
okay, you're not becoming urban transport minister. I regret to inform you.
Or charge them, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 rupee fine for doing that. And I mean, you see seatbelts. People are using seatbelts in India because there was a fine associated with it. And the same has to happen. And it's just discipline. I mean, it is, if you see the roads in Europe and all, it's not because it's now ingrained in the people. But earlier it was just a very hard disciplinary action on people who didn't follow what they were supposed to and do what they're supposed to. So it has to be very well disciplined. There's nothing else. Of course, education and all will help. But core discipline is missing.
So discipline, or the second point which you referred to, which was education. I mean, it still happens on the expressways. Little less, thankfully, than it once used to, where you used to be traveling at speed on the right-hand fast lane, and suddenly you'd find a tractor coming on the wrong side, and coming along. And when you said, if you have to go on the wrong side of the road, why are you in the fast lane? Because he thinks it's the left-hand side of the road for him if he's going on that. So education, something that can help. Mr. Agarwal?
Yes, certainly. But there's one other thing I would like to mention on this. Something that we haven't tried very seriously in India is staggering office hours. See, at the end of the day, your traffic, you have peaks and off-peaks. And what we need to try and do is, how do we move some of the peak traffic to what is today the off-peak? There was one occasion when some staggering was done when the government said that ministries would open at 9 in the morning and subordinate offices would open half an hour later. Now, to my mind, that's not enough staggering. We need to do a far wider band of, office opening and closing kind of times, with something like you have a set of core hours and you still need to work 8 hours. You can come in at 11, but as long as you put in 8 hours. Something like that is what we need to try, and I think that will help to reduce the peak. That is the major problem.
Mr. Lamaka? User behavior?
User behavior, I wanted to elaborate on what you said, because you spoke about Europe. I think there are two sides. There is enforcement, yes. There is also a system, an infrastructure of education and providing licenses, driving licenses, which puts a very high barrier for people to be able to drive, and gives a lot of time to educate them how to drive. I believe there could be something to be copied in India.
I mean, yes, some of the people who get driving licenses would help if they actually knew how to drive before they got the driving license. It doesn't always happen. You can sometimes pay. I mean, Siddharth, again, discipline the route to that. I mean, you know it. People can go and get driving licenses by just paying some money, and then once they've got the driving license, they'll figure it out on the road.
Yeah, I mean, enforcement and discipline. There's nothing more to it, in my opinion.
Okay. Enforcement and discipline, I want to get both of your views on this, because this really does contribute to the problem vastly in Indian cities. Yeah. Mr. Go?
Let me maybe take another angle. I think people put in the same condition, no matter what is their basic culture and no matter what is their basic training, tend to behave in the same way. So I'm not questioning the fact that you need discipline, etc., but I think this is not sufficient. Let me give you one very specific example. We examine very carefully all the statistics about car accidents in the world, because obviously we want to do our part about how to make our car safer, not only for the people who are driving the car and the people inside the car, but even the people outside the car, okay? And then we discovered that when you analyze the statistics, some of the reasons for which, for example, you have way much more accidents and death on the roads in some countries compared to other countries is very simple. It's the fact that in some countries you have an adequate infrastructure and it's not very expensive. Adequate infrastructure to avoid this to happen, and in other countries people are not just putting it. I'm giving you one single example, and I'm going to take a statistics that I know very well, which is statistics of accidents in Brazil, where most of the accidents are people who are being hit by car when they cross the road, okay? And particularly the highway. Well, what's the reason? Are they indisciplined? Maybe. But what could help is have on the highway places where people can cross the highway, but not crossing it on the road by crossing it through a stairway or something like this. This is something you see in many countries. Is it very expensive? Not at all. It's very simple. But you know, instead of just blaming people, saying you're not disciplined, so in a certain way you're responsible for this, we need also to make sure that the simple things which showing care and showing attention are being done.
Okay.
Number one, when we started building LRTs, monorails, and people said, no, people are indisciplined. They will dirty, they will throw the rubbish, and they will not keep it clean. It's not true. People change. People change to modalities that you provide, and they get accustomed. And if you give predictable transportation mode, people will change. And I don't think this issue about discipline is really is more an infrastructure issue. Second thing is, today in Mumbai you have walkways. You have long walkways because there's an interim solution. People need to get across, and you know that so much of traffic and the walkways are working. And this is now, Kuala Lumpur is now implementing walkways. Now why? Because you know the weather has got warmer and people need to get, so if you provide predictable, comfortable rides, people will change their behavior.
Okay, one final question perhaps, the gentleman here.
Bernhard Steinrücke, Indo-German Chamber of Commerce. Question especially to Mr. Ghosn. Have we really used the electronic, the IT know-how we have these days in traffic already? For instance, in Europe, couldn't we have a system like with the airlines? When you want to take your car and drive somewhere, you just announce your willingness to go next day somewhere in your computer, and then you get allotted a time. And then you drive when you get allotted that time. And then everybody does that. So we won't have any congestion anymore because they will only give you the time when they know the road to XYZ is free. The technology, I think, is there. When are we using it?
No, I mean, I agree with you that we have a lot of technology and it's going to develop. One specific challenge of the technology, first you have to make it affordable. That's number one, and we are working to make it affordable because it's obviously our own interest that in our cars, people benefit from something more than the other car. So there is a race from car manufacturers from one side to develop the technology, but from the second side to make this technology affordable. Now, on the specific issue that you're mentioning, I think it's a very good idea, except the fact that and our statistics show that in many cases when people take the car, they don't know exactly where they're going to land.
And of course, the problem of enforcement would come in this. Right, I think we are flat out of time. I'd like to thank you all so much for having joined us, and we look forward to passing on some of the specific suggestions that you have made to some of the policymakers in the final session. Thank you all so much.
Pleasure to